So I'm very late with this video. Unfortunately, I had family commitments and couldn't watch this late on Saturday night, and it took me into Sunday to re-watch the fight delayed, and then a little bit of time to reflect before posting my thoughts. I am, of course, talking Sergey Kovalev versus Jean Pascal. Look, when I watch a fight and can have the time to record a video straight after, I tend to go into it in a bit more detail in terms of a breakdown, like I did with the Matchroom fights this weekend, because I was able to watch them live. When I'm 2 or 3 days late to the party, I tend to stay clear of doing that because, put simply, there will have been other channels who have covered that in more detail and will have done it better timed, than I will. If you're watching this video now, you've probably already watched 3 or 4 different channels cover this fight in better detail and better time than I'm going to do. But what I'm going to focus this video on is we're going to talk a little bit about Jean Pascal now, and we're going to talk a bit about Sergey Kovalev now. We'll start with Jean Pascal. Pascal is, I don't know how old he is, but he's an older guy. He's been in a lot of big fights. He's not a ducker. Jean Pascal is a warrior. One of the brave men of the sport. Brave men of the sport. Look at the guy's resume. Jean Pascal's got a seriously underrated resume. Bernard Hopkins. Chad Dawson, when Chad Dawson was Chad Dawson. Carl Froch. That was a... People forget that Jean Pascal went 12 with Carl Froch. Obviously now Sergey Kovalev twice, Bernard Hopkins twice. This is a guy who's had big fights. Lucien Boutte, huge fight in Canada. I hope he's made a lot of money. For me, Jean Pascal is at a point in his career now where he should consider pastures new. The guy seems to have a brain outside of the ring. He seems to be a charismatic individual. I believe he's got some sort of business interest, promotional interest, working with other fighters. All of that's very good stuff. Jean Pascal, hopefully he's been sensible with his money. I think it's time for him to call it a day, personally. Jean Pascal was at the top of the light heavyweight division when the division was slightly different. Jean Pascal was number one Jean Pascal was, let's say, at top of the division when Chad Dawson was ruling the roost, when Bernard Hopkins in the late 40s was ruling the roost. I look at the light heavyweight division now, and it's a division of killers. Look back at it a few years ago. Nathan Cleverly as world champion, Bernard Hopkins as world champion, Chad Dawson as world champion, Jürgen Bremer, who I know still is in the scene, world champion. It's hardly a murderer's row, is it? If you look at it now, it is one of the nastiest, most dangerous, most competitive divisions out there. You've got Sergey Kovalev, who we'll come on to in a minute. Adonis Stevenson, a huge knockout puncher. You've got guys coming up in the ranks like Artur Beterbiev, who looks a great prospect. Guys like Eleider Alvarez hanging in the wings, who I think has the potential to go really high in the sport. It's a much more dangerous, much more competitive division now than it was when Jean Pascal was ruling the roost. And Jean Pascal for me is a fighter in decline. I talk a lot on this channel because I think it's one of the key things I look for in boxing, about how styles age. I've given examples recently about guys like George Groves and David Haye, who have styles that rely on speed, explosiveness, power, athleticism, reflexes. These are a young man's game. These styles don't age well. It's like the difference between Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins. Roy Jones, for me, clearly the better fighter when the two are in their 20s, early 30s. Bernard Hopkins, clearly the better fighter now when both guys have fought on beyond their prime. It's because Bernard Hopkins didn't have a game that relied on speed or raw power. Bernard Hopkins' game was mainly mental. He had one of the most advanced boxing brains. He was one of the most advanced technicians and chess players out there. Jean Pascal, for me, he falls into the David Haye camp. This is a guy who moves. This is a guy who keeps his hands low and uses reflexes. This is a guy who relies on explosiveness, ambushing, power. He's not a guy who's necessarily going to win fights behind a jab or win fights by tying opponents up. Jean Pascal is more of the athlete type. And, you look at that resume. You look at the 12-round wars. You look at the amount of punches he's taken. He's a fighter in decline. And you can see this. Look at that Yaneski-Gonzalez fight. Now, Yaneski-Gonzalez may turn out to be a very good fighter, but on paper, he had nothing to cause Pascal problems, and he gave Pascal all he could handle that night. A lot of people debate whether Pascal even deserved to win that fight. The Sergey Kovalev fight, I speculated pre that fight. I was saying I cannot come up with a game plan of how Jean Pascal is going to win this fight. What can he do differently? What has he got in his locker to win this fight? And, it was one of those rare occasions when I was actually right. Not only did I have no clue how Pascal was going to win the fight, neither did Jean Pascal, neither did Freddie Rhodes. The fight was simply a sparring session. It was a one-sided beatdown. Kovalev said after he could have ended the fight whenever he wanted, but he wanted to drag out the beatdown. I never believe it when fans say that or when fighters say that. I always think it's nonsense. For me, if you can get a fighter out of there, you get him out of there. But on this occasion, I'm inclined to believe Sergey that he actually did keep this fight long for the purpose of cruelty. And Jean Pascal became exceedingly low volume. He moved around the ring, not throwing any punches, trying not to get knocked out, with no tactic, no game plan, no idea how to win the fight, no option to change, no mixing it up, no change of game plan, no different style, just getting beaten from pillar to post. And you look back at it and you think all of those punches over all of those fights, have the reflexes started to wane as you're into your 30s? Has that agility and elusiveness and durability started to fade? And the answer is it probably has. Pascal can come back and he can prove to still be a top 10 light heavyweight. He can go and beat the lower level competitors. He's still got enough in his locker. But for me, his days as a world championship challenger and contender legitimately are over. For me, the win over Lucien Boutte, whilst I did score it to him, it was unconvincing. And that must be, 2 years ago now? A year and a half ago now? The 2 wins to Sergey Kovalev were demolition jobs. He looked much, much worse in both of those fights than a 50-year-old Bernard Hopkins when he fought Sergey Kovalev. For me, Pascal needs to do the sensible thing, call it a day and focus on other interests. His days as a top draw fighter have been ended by Sergey Kovalev. As for Sergey Kovalev, there is a very strong argument this guy is pound for pound number 1. He is one of the most... let me stop myself there. He is the most destructive fighter in world boxing. Nathan Cleverly has a superb chin. Look at the way Nathan Cleverly handled himself over 12 rounds with Fonfara. Look at the fact that Fonfara and him threw the most punches ever, I think, in a CompuBox records. Look at the beating Cleverly took, the injuries, the broken bones, the blood. Fonfara couldn't drop Cleverly. Sergey Kovalev destroyed him. Jean Pascal, despite the fact I do believe he's a faded fighter, he'd never even been dropped in his career before fighting Kovalev. Kovalev destroyed him. Bernard Hopkins, even though he was 50, Bernard Hopkins had never taken that one-sided a loss. Sergey Kovalev battered him for 12 rounds, won every single round convincingly, whitewashed the master boxer, Bernard Hopkins. Just look at some of Kovalev's other performances, like Ismail Salak. Forget them now, I'm not looking at BoxRec, but this guy is the scariest fighter in the sport, the most destructive fighter in the sport, possibly one of the hardest punchers pound for pound in the sport. And what makes it scary is not only does he have that raw power, but he also has seemingly an elite boxing capability. Elite. You know, a world-class jab. He seems to be capable of fighting up close and fighting on the outside. He's got great punch variety. He also appears to have a world-class chin. You know, Jean Pascal can punch. Sergey Kovalev wasn't bothered at all. Wasn't bothered at all. This guy, for me, is probably my pound-for-pound number one. You know, look at the array of top 5, top 10 fighters within his division who he has left ruined. You know, ruined. Guys like Nathan Cleverly, for my money, guys like Jean Pascal will never be the same again after the beatings they took from Kovalev. You know, I know early on in his career he killed a man in a ring. You know, it shows what a dangerous operator Sergey Kovalev is. For me, you know, I'm a big Tyson Fury fan. You know, I'm a big Andre Ward fan. For me, Sergey Kovalev is pound for pound number one. Not just based on skills, not just based on the eye test, but also now based on the resume. You know, his resume is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And he's already built a Hall of Fame resume for my money. You know, people ask me about the other big fights out there. I don't give Adonis Stevenson much hope of beating Kovalev. Yeah, Stevenson can bang, but he's very one-dimensional, very predictable. And for me, he doesn't have punch resistance, which is a key thing you need against Kovalev. I think Kovalev would have Stevenson hurt as soon as he landed. And I think that would put Stevenson in all sorts of bother. You know, let me talk about two other fights. Andre Ward, Joe Calzaghe. Two guys, you know, I'm talking a peak Joe Calzaghe and I'm talking a current Andre Ward. Two guys who I have seen as invincible, unbeatable throughout their pro careers. You know, right now, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I'd lean to Sergey Kovalev to beat Andre Ward. I'd lean to Sergey Kovalev to beat the peak Joe Calzaghe. I really would. I think he's that good. He's not, you know, he could go on to be an all-time great. And I really mean that. He likes to stay active. He's not scared of the big fights. This guy could go on to be an all-time great. He is one of the most, you know, I know he's disliked out of the ring and possibly with good reason, but he is seriously underappreciated as a boxer. This guy is the real deal. For me, Andre Ward, he's an expert at stifling a guy, fighting inside, roughing someone up. He's not going to rough up Sergey Kovalev, is he? You know, Bernard Hopkins, the master stifler, couldn't stifle him. Your Andre Ward, he certainly is the toughest matchup for Sergey Kovalev. That is certainly the test I want to see above all, but I find it hard to pick Andre Ward, I really do. As for Joe Calzaghe, I was speaking on Twitter about that today, Peak Joe versus Sergey Kovalev. You know, as I've said before, Joe Calzaghe is my favourite ever fighter, but you know, Joe Calzaghe was hurt in fights. Joe Calzaghe wasn't a natural light heavyweight. You know, sure, he was fast. He was faster than Kovalev. He was more elusive than Kovalev. He had better hand speed than Kovalev. But Calzaghe did have a tendency to get caught. And for me, I don't think that he could have lived with Kovalev over 12 with that tendency. You know, for me, Sergey Kovalev really could go down as an all-time great light heavyweight. And I'm very, very impressed. I cannot work out a tactic or a fighter to beat him right now. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, please click the thumbs up, click the subscribe button.